Hey everybody, hope you're having a great week, and I hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving coming up. So today for Technique Tuesday, it's less of a singular sort of exercise demonstration, and more of a general concept that I think people would benefit from in terms of working on the structure of their fitness, and by that I mean structural support, actually, of their body and movement and everything like that. So I'm going to keep it relatively brief. So there's a few main points, and hopefully you can remember them and take it forward into your training. So the idea is about sort of planes of movement and balancing how many different exercises we do in one plane versus another plane. And by that, I mean plane of movement, where the movement sort of exists in 3D, I guess. Well, the vast majority of the movement that we do when it comes to exercises is really flexion and extension exercises, or movements that are known as being in the sagittal plane, which isn't necessarily anything you need to know. But examples would be the most common exercises take place in this flexion extension plane, and that would be like squatting and deadlifting, lunging, stepping up, doing a bicep curl, an overhead press, whatever the case might be. You're doing flexion and extension, and we do like 99% of our training takes place there. And it makes sense because, you know, in terms of sort of your bilateral stance with the legs and also your arms, that's the best way to get stronger, is to be able to utilize sort of the kinetic chain as one full unit for things like that. The problem is that technique within squatting and deadlifting and what have you, it's all very organized, and it's very safe, which is obviously what we want. But when you repeat all of these things with such a rigid sort of structure, it somewhat does not take into account the fact that when you're moving in real life, things aren't necessarily going to be that organized. And an example that I would give, like when people exercise doing, their perfect deadlift. All right, great. I'm training how to pick stuff up off the floor. Look at my perfect form. But then the reality is, when it snows this winter, you're gonna probably end up shoveling, rounding your back, picking it up, and rotating. And then you might end up with a thrown out back. But then you're like, dude, what the hell? I've been training. I haven't had any injuries. I've been strengthening my glutes and my hamstrings. I do my deadlifts every week. And then I go out and I shovel snow for 5 minutes and I throw my back out. Well, part of that issue, I believe, is because, like I just said, the flat back, perfect deadlift, it's not what you're going to find in nature. Not everything is going to be as convenient as a barbell to be picking it up like that. So I suggest that people train things that are sort of outside of those general exercises. And you'll want to start training exercises that take place in a different plane, known as the frontal plane. But that's not really important. The idea is to not only do things flexing and extending, like, squatting down up, but do things that involve going side to side. And not only that, but do things that exist within reaching. Because when I reach for something, it's never going to be just this perfect overhead, all my joints are stacked, and I pulled this thing down. No, you're usually going to have to reach this way or reach forward and going kind of across your body, which is also known as, this transverse plane, where you're kind of twisting movements more or less. So again, my advice is, at least as a starting point, do some side-to-side movements plus rotational movements, perhaps in your warm-ups, or supersetted with some of the bigger, sagittal plane exercises. For example, I'll show you guys just a couple of ideas. And before I do that, the other thing is, like, Those other sort of planar movements they're not as fun and exciting as, doing a side lunge is not as exciting as doing a back squat. Okay. And so the problem there is unless someone's forcing you to do it, you're less likely to, prescribe it for yourself. But so just think of this as me telling you really got to do this. So anyway, an example of how you can kind of sneak it in there is, let's just say, for example, I'm doing a back squat. We're just going to pretend here, but I'm just doing my 5th rep of my back squat, right? I'm going to rest 1 minute. And then just to get a little bit of this idea around a different plane, let's say maybe I'm going to superset that with some Cossack squats. So I'm going to go from side to side, and now I'm getting some great length in my inner thigh. I'm getting some great ankle mobility here, and my core is really having to stabilize to not rotate like this, which again is not necessarily a bad thing. So, in reality, you also want to do things that do involve rotation. So maybe as a third movement, you superset that guy with some Russian twists. I even like the idea of having to rotate and reach. And a lot of people don't have access to cable machines, but you can use bands for things like doing a cable chop, where there's some variations where you're trying not to rotate at all, like a pal-off hold. And then there are some where you actually want to do a little bit of this rotation, as long as it's coming from the proper place. In most cases, the thoracic spine and things like that. And I think what you'll find is, if you spend some time doing work that, forces you to be doing these rotational ideas, plus the work of doing, something a bit more awkward, like, say, for instance, I'm going to do a deadlift with my my leg stretched out like this. I still have a flat back, but I'm going to deadlift and stand. And I've got my knee kind of propped up on the bench here. I might even do something like a very controlled sort of cross-body deadlift, where I'm hinging, but I'm also reaching to this side to grab the dumbbell. So it's a little bit, uncharacteristic in terms of the idea of those movements, but the intention there is to create different movement patterns that are actually going to mimic more of what you're going to find in real life. So as I was just making the point, you do some rotational stuff, plus picking up stuff from a little bit of a weird angle with this rotation. Then when you actually go out to shovel snow, your body's going to be like, hey, you know what? I've done this before. I've done some rotation. I've grabbed something, sort of this cross body movement pattern. And so maybe if you're strengthening all of that in those ranges of motion, I think you'll find that it translates really, really nicely. So you can kind of think of your big exercises, your flexion and extension, and your sagittal plane. You can think of those as your bread and butter, but you've also got to supplement with, I don't know if nuance is the right word there, but you want to supplement with the less common but still very important different plane movements, like your rotation, side to side, adduction, abduction, and all of that. So again, the point being, you want to kind of make sure that your training is balanced in that way. Like I said, you can start utilizing those in a warm-up. I think they're so good for warm-ups, rotation and twisting and all of that. And then later on, once you get good at those movements, you can actually load them up pretty nicely and get really strong in those positions. But typically, you're going to start with really lightweight and just get your body used to these different positions. And, it leads to some strength that is really fun over time. Being able to do, a front rack Cossack squat, that stuff ends up being really, really fun. In the beginning, it's awkward and it's, you might not be that great at it, but do it. Anyway, that's my Technique Tuesday for today. I think that's it. If you have any questions, just type them below or direct message me. All right, you guys, happy Thanksgiving.